So, I have been a pizza delivery guy for a decent amount of time, and I usually get stuck with a crappy shift at 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. I live in a pretty small city out in the boonies, so there's only like one murder per year in our area. Well, last month there were 3 back-to-back murders, and we as drivers keep on that stuff. But hey, we average out pretty good for just driving around the city all night, so it wasn't anything to get too worked up about. Anyway, it was probably around 1 a.m., and there was only me, another driver, a cook, and our manager who's in his mid-20s, and he's really cool and understanding because he had been a driver in his teens. We were all finished with all the cleaning and stuff like that because it was an unusually slow night that night. Then we finally got an order. I was the so-called lucky one to get to take this delivery down the dirt road in the middle of nowhere. I personally had never delivered to that area, but it was about 10 miles away from where I lived, so I knew there was only going to be about 5 houses on that lonely 4 miles of road. I put the pizzas in my car and started on my drive. I had just put in 2 12-inch subwoofers in the back of my '99 Honda Accord to complete my white trash look. But they weren't secured in there, and being an unkept dirt road, I was driving pretty slow. My GPS told me I had arrived, but I was about a mile off. So I turned down the subs and pulled up to what I believed to be the house. Our boss has a thing about never pulling up in the driveway no matter how much of a walk it is. And this was one of those times that I thought I'd actually do what he says. I grabbed the pizza and receipt and walked up to the door. It was a long driveway, and what sucked was they had the audacity to leave all the outside and inside lights off to the house. Probably just watching a movie, I thought to myself, as it wasn't this unusual this time of night. I got up to the door and knocked. Nothing. Great, 10-mile drive here for nothing. I knocked again and again. I started to get uncomfortable, and that's when I heard the quiet sound of someone or something walking. It was coming from around the side of the house that I couldn't see. I was getting a bit unnerved and decided this was a great time to start heading back to my car. I didn't want to go back empty-handed though, and when I got to the safety of my car, I decided to ring up the person and see if they were just asleep. I was probably just imagining the footsteps or mistaking them for the creaking of the old house. No answer. I decided to balls up and head over to the door one last time for one final knock. So I put my phone on flashlight mode and walked up to the door. One more knock and nothing. This time I heard the footsteps again and I turned my light and saw a man wearing some sort of a werewolf mask. I bolted to my car with him closely on my heels, but it was obvious that he wasn't the fastest man out there, and I easily made it to the car with time to spare. I threw the pizza on the car and floored it, almost hitting the man with my car. I called the police, and it turned out that, while yes, this call had been made from inside their house, the actual residents were out of town. This was only a few days ago, and they haven't found the guy. I included a picture of the house for all to see. I was parked by the red, and the yellow indicates where the guy was. I still wonder if this man was part of the murders in our quiet little town. But whoever that was, they probably weren't in it for the pizza. On a lazy Friday night when I had the house to myself, I was chilling in the living room with the lights off watching movie after movie. It was past like 10, and I had a craving for pizza, so I ordered a pie from the local late-night pizza place. It was a rainy night, part of the reason why I chose to just stay in and watch movies. Ironically, I was watching some scary movie at the moment, and at some point during that I heard loud steps coming up the front stoop outside. I waited for a knock or the doorbell, but when I didn't hear either, I muted the TV out of curiosity. I then went to the front door and quietly lifted the slider above the peephole to look out at who could be on the porch. I was expecting to see the pizza guy, but at first all I thought I saw was black. It took me a few moments to realize I was looking back at someone's eye, pressed up on the other side of the peephole. I basically leaped back for being startled. I called through the door asking if it was the pizza guy. A deep man's voice called back, "Yes, it is." But something wasn't right. I looked through the peephole again, and now it seemed like the man on the other side was covering it with his hand or something. I didn't know what to do, other than yell, "Why are you covering the peephole?" He didn't respond to that. Instead, he just knocked on the door. I yelled at him to please leave, and I walked away from the door back to the living room. A few moments later, the doorbell rang. I heard the same deep voice yell, "Pizza, open up." I once again got up and went to check through the peephole, but he was still covering it. I shouted at him again to please leave or I'd be calling the police. Now I turned off the TV to allow for total darkness in the house. All I could hear for a while was the sound of the pouring rain outside. When I went back to the front door to look through the peephole once again, now I was able to see through it. The man was no longer on the stoop. I called the pizza place and asked the guy who picked up the phone if he could check if the delivery driver had arrived to my house yet. I of course explained what was going on and why I was asking for that. He said he'd give the driver a call and then call me back. So I hung up and waited like 2 minutes. And the guy called me back to tell me that the driver had not yet arrived to my house, and he suggested that I call the police. He also said the driver would call me when he arrives. I thanked him and hung up the phone. Next thing I remember is hearing knocks from the backyard door. I felt like this couldn't be happening. I actually felt sick. I crept to the back door, which has a pull-down blind which covers the glass for privacy, and was currently pulled down. This next part I still don't understand. Even though I crept quietly to the back door, as soon as I got there, that same familiar voice said, "I see you there, open the door." Then he tried opening it himself, but thank God it was locked. Once again, I yelled at him calling the cops if he didn't leave. By a luck of good timing, my phone began to ring, and it was the real pizza guy calling to say he was here. I told him to please come to the front door quickly. I opened the front door for him and let him in. He asked if I needed help, and I begged him to stay with me until the police would show up. And he did me that favor. Police showed up within 10 minutes. Having someone there waiting with me made me feel a lot better. There weren't any other disturbances from that man outside from the time the pizza guy got there to the time the police left. I went straight to sleep after that. I went so far as to pushing my dresser in front of my door, just as a desperate act of feeling safe. Thank God that man left for good. It was a little past 9 p.m. on a Saturday 3 years ago, back when I was delivering pizzas for this pizza place called Gino's. It was my last delivery of the night. My last delivery at that place ever, actually. Not because my shift was ending, but for reasons you're about to find out. I was supposed to deliver one regular pizza to this house around 10 minutes from the restaurant. I got there relatively quickly because I drive fast. It was a gated property, so I had to park on the street and walk through the gate up the decently long pathway to the front door. There, I rang the bell and waited. No one answered after a minute, so I rang it again. I knew the doorbell was working because I heard the ringing from outside. Finally, the lights in a room next to the front door turned on, so I naturally looked up to the window, and there were 2 people looking out the window at me. Extremely off-putting and unnerving. As I looked back at them, the front door opened, and a man wearing some pig mask opened the door. I couldn't see his face, but he sounded very joyous for the arrival of the pizza. He apologized for their costumes and said they were having a role-playing party. He told me to come in for a second since it was cold and that he'd go fetch his wallet. So I stepped into the house and he shut the door behind me. Then he disappeared into another room. I stepped forward a few feet to get a view into the adjacent room, and the 2 people I saw standing at the window moments before were gone. The man called me into another lit-up room nearby. I didn't feel too comfortable, to be completely honest. The whole mask thing was insanely weird, and the 2 creepy people watching me at the window. Still holding the pizza box, I walked to the other room. As I passed the living room into the room next to it, I was just speechless as to what I saw. There were 6 chairs covered in white sheets arranged in a circle. 4 of them were being sat on by other people wearing bizarre plastic animal masks. The guy in the pig mask who opened the door said, "Come in, it'll just be a moment." I asked, "What are you guys role-playing exactly?" All 5 of them erupted into this creepy laughter, making me even more uncomfortable. The man in the pig mask told me to sit in one of the empty chairs. I looked at him without saying a word. Then I saw someone else creepily entering the room, kind of half hiding behind a wall opposite me. He was wearing a fraud mask. I said, "You can just have the pizza," as I started to back away. There was no more laughter, no verbal response. Two of the people in chairs got up and started moving towards me, so I did the only thing I could think to, and I threw the pizza box as hard as I could at them into the room and ran for the front door. Then I sprinted to my car, and yes, I was chased outside. One of them tried breaking my passenger side window as I hightailed it out of there. I floored it down the street and went back to the pizzeria, where I told my boss what happened, that I was basically robbed, if not about to be kidnapped or worse. He didn't even want to call the cops. With that, I quit that job that night. Against my better judgment, I got another pizza delivery job a few months later, but nothing even remotely close to something this strange ever happened again. I started at 16 in my town in the suburbs of a big city. At first they put me to help the chef in the kitchen and clean the place and stuff. 2 months later, my boss told me that on the days off of the main delivery boy, I would deliver, and I said yes, of course. Then all of a sudden, the delivery boy quit when he came from delivering a pizza at this one house. He looked traumatized and shaken, like something with his face and his eyes. He went into my boss's office and they argued for about 15 minutes. Then he came out and said, "Good luck, kid," then told me he had quit. I asked why, and he said, "Just a shitty job, that's all." He then patted me on the back and left. I knew it was something else than just a shitty job, but I didn't think much of it. That was the last time I saw him. So for the next couple of weeks, I was the delivery boy till they could find someone that can deliver pizzas. About 2 weeks into me delivering pizzas, my boss gave me the address to a house, and as usual I put in the GPS and went over. Watching the sunset while driving over there, I was hoping it'd take 2 minutes tops so I could get home. Unfortunately, it was in the rural side of town, where the houses are like a quarter mile from each other. I stopped in front of the 2-floor house and looked at it. I got the creepiest feels when I stared at it. Lawn not cut, with weeds, dead trees, and the old porch with no chairs or flower pots or tables, just plain. It seemed abandoned, but I got out anyways and knocked on the door. I was hoping my boss gave me the wrong address or something so I could get the hell out of there. Then, the door lock started to shake and the door opened. It was an old lady, at least 70 years old or something round there, with white hair, teeth missing, and skinny, very short too, but her eyes just glaring at me. It really freaked me out. I figured if I was nice, things would turn out okay after all. "Pepperoni pizza, ma'am," I said as friendly as I could. "Yes," she said with a hoarse voice as if she had a sore throat. "Alrighty, here you go." I handed the pizza over, but she just looked at it with no emotion and didn't take it, getting her purse. "Did you come with someone else?" I froze, then quickly looked up at her, still glaring at me. That question really frightened me. No," I said. "Where's the other one? You ran off on me last time you came." Ran off, I thought. It didn't make sense. "He quit some weeks ago," I said. Then she got her purse and started searching for money, or so I thought. She did for about a minute, the longest minute ever, and with the hands in her purse, she stopped and looked at me, not in a look of surprise or in confusion, but just like as if she was thinking really hard on something. I could tell she was holding something in her right hand inside the purse, but I couldn't see what. I really started to freak out at this point. What if it was pepper spray, or a knife, or even a gun? I mean, what could take her so long to get $10 out of her purse? Then, behind her, I saw a shadow, a silhouette of a man coming to the door. and all of a sudden, I heard footsteps crushing the leaves on my left side next to the porch, and a man's deep voice saying, "Hey." I looked over and saw a head of a middle-aged man with a look of anger peeking over the porch. This guy then started to climb the porch, and that was when I realized I had enough. I darted to my car, threw the pizza inside, turned it on, and drove off. I didn't look back as I drove off in the dark. I had to lie and pay for the pizza out of my own pocket, but it was worth it. On the day I quit, I decided to tell my boss what happened that evening, to which he freaked out as well and asked me why I hadn't told him. He said James told him something like, he just walks out of there and didn't pay attention to her. My boss then called the cops to look into the sketchy situation, and he told me I could leave. About 2 days later, he called back, saying the cops had the house registered as foreclosed for over a year, and they found 3 people living in there when they broke in, which were 2 men and the old lady I encountered. They were arrested, and he didn't tell me anything else. I'm still traumatized, and I don't know what would have happened if I would have waited. They could have easily jumped me, but thank God I quit afterwards, and I'm still alive. I'll never forget the time I was covering my friend's shift at a pizzeria we worked at. He was the delivery boy, while I was usually the one manning the register. On that night, I made 2 real deliveries to normal people. Then, my manager gave me one final delivery for the night. It was 5 miles away, which was a long drive for what I was used to. The GPS told me to turn off the highway into some very quiet town. Somehow I'd never even heard of this town. The GPS took me down some side roads that were even more dead than the main streets in this town. Half of the street lights weren't even on. I didn't like the looks of this place. I just wanted to deliver the pizza and be gone. So I arrived to the house. It was a single-floor little thing. I rang the bell, and almost immediately the door swung open. There was an older man, maybe in his upper 50s, that opened the door. His few hairs left on his head were gray, and he had a very pale face with a gray mustache. He gave me a smile and told me he'd be right back. He walked away into his house out of view, and I just stood there in the cold, waiting for him. I was a little uncomfortable with the area, and the looks of the guy answering didn't help. The sound of stomping on the creaky floors inside the house came to the door, as the man appeared back in the doorway with a smile. He said I should come inside where it's warm while I waited. I told him it's okay, but he just started nudging for me to come inside. I cannot justify my actions, but it was like 5 degrees outside. I foolishly stepped inside the sketchy stranger's house. He shut the door behind me and stepped off into another room in a hurry. It wasn't even much warmer in the house. He clearly didn't even have a heating system. I found myself creeping closer and closer to the door as I got more uncomfortable. Then, the man came out of another room and gave me another smile. He opened up a door, apparently leading to the basement. He looked down and told me that he normally leaves his money down there. He asked me to come down there with him, but I refused. Even from where I was standing, I could see it was totally pitch dark down there. And then, what happened next is where it all fell apart. I heard the sound of a creaking step coming from the basement. Somebody else was down there. I decided it was time to go and turned around to open the door, but the man was already right on top of me. I punched him in the face and managed to get him in a hold, but I heard somebody stomping up the basement steps, and I had to get out of there. I pushed the man to the floor, ran outside, got in my car, and drove off without looking back. I told my manager everything, and he called the cops, but I don't know whatever became of that. My manager gave me a couple days off afterwards. Since then, I am much wiser to the fact that you should never enter a stranger's house. I was out doing a delivery one late night. It was probably the longest drive I'd have ever taken for a pizza delivery. From the pizza place I worked at, it was a 20-minute drive, which isn't too crazy out where I live. Plus, they ordered 4 large pies, so I figured it was a party and I would get a much bigger tip. Navigating the dirt roads at night was always annoying, though. I pulled up to the given address. It was some old, sketchy-looking building, literally in the middle of a forest clearing. There were no cars parked anywhere or any lights on. I put my car in park and called my boss. I asked him to reread the address at least 3 times to make sure I typed it in right, but that checked out. I could tell he was in a really bitchy mood, and he told me to at least knock on the door and check it out. He would normally get mad if we took back 1 pie, but I was afraid of what he would do if I brought back 4. I was insanely unnerved, but got out anyway and forced myself to the front door of the building. There was no doorbell, so I just knocked really hard. I heard nothing and didn't really expect to hear anything. I was extremely disappointed, not because nobody answered the door, but because I was realizing that it was all a waste of time and gas. I knocked 1 more time out of desperation, and then began to hear some kind of rustling noises from inside of the building. I knocked again and yelled that I was the pizza guy. There was silence now. I felt a bit more uncomfortable now than before. But before I could turn around, I noticed something at the window. There was someone looking through the window. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I noticed were their eyes. Their eyes were open wider than I knew possible, staring intently at me. I was disturbed enough by this and dropped the pizzas and ran back to my car. The shitty thing wouldn't start until turning the key for the 3rd time. I drove off the grass and back onto the dirt road. When I felt the car rocking about, shaking and bumping, something wasn't right. I didn't make it far from the building before I started hearing a sharp scraping sound coming from outside. There was so much resistance that I couldn't even drive. The car came to a stop. I got out of the car to check what the hell was wrong. A chill ran up my spine as I began to feel like my heart was constantly skipping beats. My tires had been slashed and had completely fallen off the rim. Not just the front, though. All 4 tires were slashed. I realized somebody did this when I was knocking on the door to that building. Instead of running, I got back in the car and locked the doors. I was so close to that building, I could practically see it from where I was if it weren't for the trees blocking the view. I dialed 911 and explained everything to the operator. She told me the cops would be over as soon as possible and that I need to stay hidden. I asked her if it was advisable to stay in the car or run, and she told me it would be best to stay in the car with the door locked. She asked me to stay on the line with her until the cops arrived. My whole body was shaking. In all directions, there was nothing but dark, seemingly endless forest. I knew it would take forever for the cops to get there. I was not comfortable with sitting in that car so close to whoever did this. The next part, though, is what utterly destroyed me. It still shakes me to this day, and I hope nobody ever has to experience this kind of fear. As I was scanning all the windows, making sure nobody was outside, I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was the same person I saw at that window. Eyes open wider than ever. I could see now that it was a woman, and I could ever so slightly see a smile begin to spread across her face. I opened my door and full on sprinted into the woods, not caring how much noise I made. I ran until I was out of breath, which didn't take long, and I hid behind a giant log on the ground. I tried to cover my loud breathing with my hands as I waited and waited for what felt like hours, until I finally heard sirens in the distance. I gathered up all the stamina I had left to run all the way back in the direction of the dirt road. Eventually, the glowing red and blue lights came into view, and I had never felt better in my life. They were parked in front of my car, investigating with flashlights. I came out yelling at them like a lunatic to help me. I fell to the floor and started to gig, almost throwing up from running so much. They picked me up and began to question me, to which I explained everything to the best of my ability. One of the two cars drove over to the building, and the two officers began to search the building. They came back with nothing except for a couple of spiky objects. These objects were exactly the same as the ones used to slash my tires. The cops guessed that it was some kind of sick, demented couple, being that I saw the woman, but unfortunately they were never found, and that still kills me to this day. I obviously quit my job right after that and started working at a local grocery store. I know that I'll never forget seeing that woman at the back of my car. At the age of 17, I was working as a pizza delivery boy for a local pizza place. I was doing it for months by this point. I had done countless deliveries already. My first car was an old, cheap Toyota, so it was perfect for bopping around town with. It was a Friday or Saturday night. I was working the closing shift, which was 12 a.m. It was open later on weekends. This was towards the end of the night, past 11 for sure. My boss, who I'll just call Mario, would always give me the details for the houses I'd be delivering to and their orders. We had an order for 1 pie to a woman named Karen, ironically. It was an unusually long drive away, about 15 minutes. Most orders come locally around the area, like 5 minutes away on average. I expected a better tip for this reason. I brought the pizza to my car and off I went, listening to my usual playlist on the way. I pulled down the block of the address and pulled up in front of the house. It was a small-sized house, as were most of the houses in the area. It seemed to be a lower-income area. The lights were on in one of the rooms on the first floor. I was approaching the door, when suddenly a woman called out from a window from the house next door, saying, "Excuse me, that pizza's for us, we gave the wrong address." So I walked next door to the front door and saw that the doorbell was broken. So I opened the storm door and then knocked really loud on the main door. There wasn't an answer for a good 30 seconds, so I knocked again. And I heard a woman's voice on the other side yell, "1 second," but they still took forever to open the door. Another minute passed before the door finally opened, and a woman in probably her mid-40s answered the door. She right away smiled at me and gave this flirtatious head-to-toe stare at me as if she were checking me out. She said in a very loud voice, "Chels, come look how handsome the delivery boy is." Another woman about the same age came over to the door, and she did the same thing. Right away I felt my cheeks getting red, as I was a bit shy around older women like that. The woman who opened the door, who I'm assuming was Karen, asked me what time I get off work. And that was when I started getting really nervous, because I wasn't good at flirting with women at that age. I said this is probably my last delivery, and then one of the women asked me if I wanted to come in and have some wine with them. I knew my friends would all rip on me forever if I blew this opportunity, so I said yeah, sure. They asked how old I was, and I said 21. And then they both laughed, and one of them said they don't care if I'm under 21. They told me to sit on the couch, so I did, and they both sat on either side of me. This whole encounter felt too good to be true to me. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. I had a feeling these two women were already very drunk. From here, the women are both being very flirty with me, commenting on my dimples, saying how cute my shyness was and all this stuff. I was drinking some wine, pretending like it didn't taste disgusting to me, because I didn't drink wine at that age at all. The woman Chelsea started saying that they want to show me something in the basement. I laughed and said, "What is it?" They both laughed and said it's a secret, but that I'll like what it is. They wanted me to go down first. Honestly, I had my own fantasy about what was going to happen in the basement. Unfortunately, it was nowhere near that. I walked over to the doorway of the basement and looked down into the darkness below. I looked back at them and noticed they weren't laughing anymore. They had these blank faces. Only until they noticed me look back at them and they started to laugh and smile again. I said in a firm voice, "What's down there?" They said almost in unison, "It's a surprise." I started to walk slowly down into the basement, asking where the light switch is. One of them said, "Leave the lights off." Now this part I'm not 100% certain of, but I was looking down into the basement, and I thought I saw something move. something as in a person's arm or hand. I turned around and saw the two women weirdly creeping towards the door sneakily. I stepped out of the basement and shut the door. I told them I need the money for the pizza as I nervously walked around them closer to the front door. This was when I spotted the towering huge man standing in the doorway of an adjacent room, probably the kitchen. His 5 words have stayed with me all these years later. He said, "Let's just make this easy." I turned for the door and said the pizza's free. I ran to open it and slammed it behind me, only to hear it open seconds later. I got in my car, locking the door first thing, and that man was already outside my passenger side window looking in. He tried opening the door and then knocked on the glass. I put it in drive and got out of there not looking back. I got back to work and told my boss what happened and why I came back empty-handed. He and the rest were in shock. I called the non-emergency number to report what happened, just in case if anything else should be reported at that address again, the police would know something awful's going on in that house. Whatever trap I was about to walk into, thank God I didn't find out what it was. When I was 19 years old, I was still working at a nearby pizza place to help pay for food and gas and stuff. The job was always pretty easy, just taking the order, boxing up the food when it's done, putting it in a bag, and driving it to the given address. I'd done it a million times before, and nothing weird ever happened. It was very repetitive. Tips would usually be around $3 to $5 depending on the distance. Sometimes more generous people would give 10 or more though. I remember this order was just a chicken parm hero and a regular slice. Smaller orders like this usually yielded lesser tips, but I didn't have a choice in which deliveries I did. I was on my way to the address, and of course, the house was apparently on a dead-end block. This block had a more rural feel to it than the rest of the neighborhood. One of the houses had an RV sitting on the grass with a small patch of woods next to it. The other houses looked like little farmhouses. There was a lot more space on this particular street. And then I pulled up to the address. It was this small, weird-looking house with a huge property, though. It sat next to what appeared to be an abandoned house with overgrown grass and shrubs. It was probably around 6 p.m. and it was getting pretty dark out, so it was around the time people would start putting on their lights inside their houses. But all the lights in the house were off, and I noticed the front door seams cracked open. I began to walk over to the front door, and I heard a piano being played. It sounded like it was a couple rooms away at least, off by some walls or a door or something. I knocked on the door and then rang the bell after a few minutes, only the doorbell didn't work. The piano was still playing. I felt weird just walking in, so I walked around the property towards the back. The backyard was a literal mess, things scattered all over the grass. I even saw a broken, rusty chain-link fence just sitting in the middle of the yard. I went to the back door and knocked really loud. I looked through the glass of the door and saw nothing except for what looked like a really messy storm room. Clearly these people were not neat freaks to say the least. When nobody answered the back door either, I went back around front and called one of the guys at the pizzeria to confirm the address with him. He took a second to check what he wrote down, and he confirmed that I was at the correct address. So I went back to the front door, pushed it open, and heard the creepy sounding piano music still playing. I yelled, "Pizza's here." The piano stopped. Someone yelled, "Over here." Then the piano resumed. They were playing this simple yet creepy repetitive song as if on loop. There were also no lights on in this house, so it was almost hard to see in there. I walked straight, getting closer to the sound of the music. The smell inside the house was very musty and off-putting. When I got halfway into, I guess what you'd call the foyer, I felt very uncomfortable. I wasn't going to go any further. I yelled, "I'm by the front door, sir." The music stopped, this time for good, and now there was just silence. I backed towards the door again so that I would be closer to the outside. I was expecting to hear footsteps coming towards me, but no, it was just dead silent. I said, "Sir?" And a voice from another room said, "Yes, sorry, I have trouble walking. Could you just bring it in here, please?" I asked, "What room are you in, sir?" And he took a moment to answer back, "If you just walk through the living room, I'm in the dining room." There were no directions on the phone to do any of this, so this was very strange. I thought for a second about my next course of action. I felt bad leaving in the case that this was some old, feeble man just living in a messy house. I started walking through the living room, and there was an opening that led to what I presumed to be the dining room. Me, being my overly cautious and paranoid self, was still suspicious. Instead of walking straight into the dining room, I peeked around the wall just enough for one eye to see into the room. I saw the piano, but there was no one sitting at it. I also didn't see anyone in the entire room. With that, I quietly but quickly walked back towards the front door, shut the door behind me, and drove back to the pizzeria. I explained that I got a sketchy vibe inside the house. My boss was completely understanding, especially when the alleged customer didn't call back asking why I left. That said everything. I didn't really understand the logic in trying to commit a robbery in your own house, and nor did my boss or coworkers. So later that night after work, I booked up that address, and that house was foreclosed on months ago, and it had been vacant. When I told this to everyone, they had the same mouth-dropping reaction I did. I was truly mere steps away from probably getting robbed. That, or someone was trying to play a horrible prank on an unsuspecting pizza delivery guy. It was my last week working at an Italian restaurant. It was a half pizzeria, half Italian restaurant, so my duties would switch from shift to shift. Sometimes I'd work the front register in the pizzeria, sometimes I'd be a busboy in the restaurant side, and sometimes I'd be doing deliveries. I liked doing deliveries the most because I'd make tip money. So it was ironic that I left this job with a horrible, scarring experience doing a delivery. It was a late-night delivery. Of course, this is when the shady things happen. We got an order for 3 specialty pizzas. It was a big order, probably like $70 worth of pizza. It was on the bad side of town. This was already a minor red flag. Good thing I drove a crappy old Civic and wouldn't draw any negative attention out in that area, or so I thought. It was a 15-minute drive at least, and when I got to the house, I went up to ring the bell. The door opens within seconds, and this Latino man opens the door halfway, sees the pizzas, opens it fully, exposing the pistol in his hand. I'm not a gun person, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was a Colt 45. But I wasn't really paying attention to what kind of gun it was. My heart basically dropped out of my ass at the first sight of it and realizing the situation. Then 2 more Latino men came to the door and grabbed me while the first one still had me at gunpoint. They were yelling in Spanish at each other. Then the guy with the gun says in broken English, "Give me all of your stuff." I said okay, as I could barely breathe or speak due to my panic. I grabbed my wallet, which was all I could really offer him. He then yelled phone, and I gave him my phone as well. It was a Motorola Razr, the iPhone of the 2000s pretty much. One of them even forcibly grabbed my wrist and yanked off my watch. Thankfully it wasn't an expensive watch. After this, one of them grabbed my ID out of my wallet and read out my address. Then they threatened me, basically saying if I told anybody about this, they'd come to my address and kill my whole family. I said okay, I understand, wanting to cry for help and for my life, but I couldn't. They then pushed me out of the house down the stoop, causing me to land on my hands and knees and start to bleed. They slammed the door shut, and all I had left on me now were my keys. I didn't return back to the pizzeria. I was too shaken and disturbed. I went home, noticeably quiet and shaky. My parents picked up on it. They also saw my scuffed up shorts and my bloody knees. They knew something was wrong, and they tried prying it out of me. I had to tell them the truth. I told them I was robbed at gunpoint on a delivery, and they had our address and threatened to come kill us if I reported them. My dad, who had connections with the police department, right away called the number of one of his close friends, and they immediately did a background check of the person living in that house. His name was Rodrigo. He had 4 prior felony convictions. And so, my dad, with the help of his police connections, ignoring the threat from the man with the gun, had a squad of police cars surround the house and enter the house with their guns drawn. I wasn't there, of course, but we heard a description of the scene through my dad's connections. 2 of the 3 men were still in the house and were arrested and charged. The man who had 4 convictions already got a life sentence. One of the guys by his side had a prior conviction and was sentenced to 5 years. The 3rd guy wasn't in the house, and I don't think they ever found him. To this day, he's still out there for all I know. And on several occasions since then, I've woken up to sounds from outside when the windows are open, like footsteps on the side walkway to the backyard, or the gate swinging open and closed. It could just be my imagination or being paranoid, but I do still worry for my and my family's well-being. Enough time has passed now that I think that man fled the country, or at the very least knows better than to ever show his face in this town again. But still, it is something that hangs in the back of my mind. Working as a pizza delivery boy, you'll run into a lot of strange things. However, this story may be an excessive example of that. I was 21 years old, and it was a late Friday night shift at John's Pizza, meaning I would be closing with my boss. It was about 9 o'clock, an hour before closing. My next delivery was to the Saugerties, the next town over. The drive wasn't too long, maybe 15 minutes. I was a bit confused. The map was taking me to an isolated road that seemed to lead to nothing. I drove down it anyway, and shortly realized it led to a house by the water. It seemed every light in the house was on. Upon getting closer, I could hear music blasting from inside the house even with my windows shut. Strangely, there were only 2 cars parked in front of the house, at least from what I could tell. It was a pretty wide open property. The front of the house faced the water, so the road, or driveway I suppose, curved around to the front by the water, on the ground. As I walked up to the front door, I took more notice to the fact that the house was like brand new. I then rang the bell a few times since the music was so loud. I was caught completely off guard when 2 women opened the door, one blonde and one brunette, barely clothed. They had huge, flirty grins on their faces. The blonde woman grabbed the pizza while the brunette handed me a 20. I was about to ask where everyone was, but the brunette called me cute and asked me for my number. I thought I was about to get extremely lucky. After giving her my number, I was about to attempt getting myself invited in, but the blonde immediately did that for me anyway. I entered the house and picked up on a rather unpleasant odor almost immediately, and there were literally no people anywhere. But I didn't care that much. The 2 women began to lead me upstairs, but unfortunately, this story did not go in the direction you may have hoped it would. I was literally on the 2nd step when a horrifying scream for help came from upstairs. I looked up there and then at the 2 women. They were looking at each other. The blonde one very clearly mouthed the word shit to the brunette. I didn't even really piece everything together at that moment, but I still just kind of instinctively knew to run. I must have looked back like 20 times before I was able to turn around the car and drive back down the long driveway. Looking back through the mirror, I shit you not, at each and every one of the windows in the house, there were heads peering out to me as I drove away. Of course, I called the police on my way back to work and told them to check the place out. They did, and some investigator guy called me back not even an hour later, telling me whoever was there abandoned the place, and that, in fact, it was a brand new, just-built vacant house for sale. It didn't surprise me much. There was no party going on there. That same night, I got a text saying, "We know where you work." That was enough to drive me to quit that job. Since I mentioned a possible victim upstairs to the police, they came to my house to ask a series of questions about the people. I have also had my number changed since then, as I want no possible links to this incident, and I want to live with peace of mind. So it was my last delivery of the night at Domino's Pizza to a house that was about 10 minutes away from the shop. There was a note on the door, which I read after ringing the bell. It said, "To Pizza Guy, please let yourself in and leave the pizza in the upstairs bedroom. Money will be on the bed." Immediately, red flags were springing up in my head all over. I actually called my boss and told him I didn't feel safe going in there, and he actually told me it would be best to just go inside. I tried to use my charm, as people say I have, to persuade my boss, but he was hell-bent on me not bringing back that pizza. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. It was an average-sized house with some furniture that seemed a bit aged. There was a small nightlight shaped like a candle on the wall, providing just enough light to see a bit into the living room and my way upstairs. There were no lights in any of the rooms up there, just another candle nightlight. More red flags going off in my head. I come to the end of the small hallway upstairs. There are 2 doors, one open, one shut. The open door leads into a dark room, which I had to guess was the bedroom. As you may imagine, I was shaking in my shoes, afraid for any sudden sounds or movements anywhere. I pushed the door open completely and pressed my hand against the wall looking for the light switch. Found it. I flicked it on. Nothing. The lights didn't seem to work in this room. I very slowly walked over to the center of the room until something cushiony stopped my leg. It was a bed. I placed the pizza on the bed and began to search for the money in the dark. Just then, I heard the faintest, quietest thing come from outside of the room. I lifted my head and then resumed searching even faster. I was hoping to God it was just some kind of old person living here and they were too sick or nervous or whatever to meet someone. I found the money. It felt like 2 bills. I hoped they were 10s. I put them in my pocket and left the room. I stopped outside the room and saw the door to the other room was open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier. Your pizza's on the bed. Have a great day. I myself could hear the shake in my voice. There was no kind of response. I started to lean into the dark room to maybe get a better view. Too dark. I reached my hand into the room and searched for a light switch, but something grabbed my arm with a painfully tight grip and tried pulling me into the room. I screamed and jabbed at the arm with my keys, finally breaking free and getting back to my car. Nothing chased me out, nobody followed my car. I told my boss about it, and even talked him into giving me a raise for making me go through that hell. He didn't want me to call the cops for whatever reason. It wasn't really on the top of my mind, but in hindsight, I guess it would have made sense to get the police to check that place out. Anyway, not everything was terrible. I did get my pay raised from $7.50 to $8.50. I was never the delivery boy when I worked at Gino's Pizzeria, but when the new kid called out sick on like his 2nd day, I had to take over for the night. It was a slow Tuesday night for deliveries, so it wasn't too bad. I had a manual 1998 Ford Mustang, a gas guzzler, so I in no way wanted to beat that car around town delivering pizzas. I made 3 normal deliveries within 3 hours. The place closes at 9 on weekdays, so I estimated 1 or maybe 2 more deliveries for the night. I picked up the phone to a customer who sounded like the definition of a meth head or something. She had a raspy voice, she stuttered, she forgot what she was saying, she had long pauses. Literally there was like a 10-second gap between her saying, "Can I just get and regular pizza?" It was a huge production just getting the address from her. Sounded like she was asking someone in the background what the address was. Well, I was just so excited to meet these people. After she gave me the address, she hung up without me even telling her the price or how long. I told my chef, whose name was actually Mario, I know, a bit cliche, 1 regular pie. 10 minutes later, I was on my way. We live in the middle of absolute nowhere, so each delivery was a longer trip with a bigger tip. It took probably 10 minutes for me to get to the location. There was a long and dark gravel road through the woods and occasional trailer homes I had to drive through until I finally reached their home. It was a trailer home. The lights were off inside, but I could see the orange glow of a fire coming from out back, and I could hear a woman yelling at someone. When I shut the passenger side door after grabbing the pizza, I noticed the curtains to one of the windows move. Somebody was just watching me. I didn't know if I should knock on their door or go around back. It sounded like there was more than one person back there, so I decided to just go around back. I greeted them, and they spun around faster than a bullet. They were disgusting. They looked like typical trailer trash meth heads. The woman looked at, I'm guessing her husband, and asked what he's doing here. He then scolded her, saying she was the one who gave the address. They seemed to be standing close together to hide something behind them, and quite frankly, I didn't want to see what it was. I asked them if I should go around front, and then they whispered something to each other. The woman pointed at me and told me to wait there. She would go get the money. She went inside, and for the next 2 minutes, I awkwardly stood there trying not to stare at the scary-looking guy, who I knew was staring at me the whole time. Finally, the woman emerged from the house and went back next to the man. She handed the man some money and asked him to count it. She whispered something after that. I was getting very nervous now. I felt as if they were going to try and rob me or something. I wasn't stupid. The man started counting the money very slow. I mean, really slow, like 5, 10. I kept my eyes on the woman. She was looking into the woods behind me. And then she nodded her head, staring off behind me, and saw some huge guy approaching me with an axe in his hand. I flung the pizza box at him to try and slow him down, and somehow it worked. Or maybe he just didn't chase me. I got home safely. I didn't even go back to work that night. When Mario the chef texted me, I told him what happened, and all he said was, "Holy shit." That was it. I'm happy that was the only night I had to deliver. So if you live in the suburbs or city, sure, be a pizza boy. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, maybe try the supermarket instead. I'll never forget this night. The pizza place I worked at was about to close, and I was getting ready to go home when the phone rang. I was working the counter alone that night, so I was taking calls. I picked up the phone. There was complete silence, so I hung up. About a minute later, the phone rings again, so I pick up again. Still silence. I was about to hang up again when I heard the very weak and cold voice of an old woman on the other end. She said she wanted a regular pie delivered. I remained polite on the phone, but on the inside I was screaming. I just wanted to get home and end my shift. I called out to my boss that somebody is requesting a delivery. He told me I had to go. I was upset at first, but I realized it's another tip, and the old ones usually tip the most, so I decided it was okay. I took down the address and told her I would be there soon, but she had already hung up. I thought that was rude, but I ignored it and yelled to the chef that I needed one regular. My boss told me to just go home after the delivery as the place would be closed. So a little before 10 o'clock, I got in my car and put the address into my GPS. The house was 7 miles away. The GPS took me to the quiet side of town. I arrived to the house. It was a small, one-floor house on a very quiet and empty block. I took the pizza and walked up to the door and rang the doorbell. There were no lights on in the house. I hoped that she hadn't given me the wrong address. I rang the doorbell again. There was still no answer. I was about to give up when I turned my head and saw somebody standing at the window. I got a little freaked out and backed up at first, but I eventually got closer to the window to see the person. It was an old woman, probably in her late 70s. She was just staring at me with a blank expression. I yelled to her through the glass that I had her pizza. She didn't react to what I said, so I screamed it louder. A big smile ran across her face. Not a pleasant, genuine smile. It was a smile that sent chills down my spine. I still remember that exact face she made through the window. I decided that I was freaked out enough and got back to my car and set the pizza in the passenger seat. I had to text my boss about this. I shot him a quick text and started my car, ready to get the hell away. I looked to my right to get one more look, to see the woman standing right outside my passenger side window, giving me the same stare she had given me before. I put my car in drive and floored it down the street, not looking back. My boss never made me do a late night delivery again. Oh, yeah. This happened 4 years ago when I was still in high school. I was told to do my last delivery of my shift. I got in my car, which was a 1999 Camry, perfect for delivering pizzas. I GPSed the address of my phone. I live upstate in the country, so all pizza deliveries were long drives. I remember the sun was starting to set, so it was probably around 7 o'clock. I'd say after a good 15 minutes of driving through the foresty dirt roads, my GPS said I had arrived. It was an old little cottage-like house made almost entirely of wood. It was sitting all by itself in the middle of absolutely nothing but forest. The lawn was completely unkept, as the grass was almost at knee height. I was used to this kind of thing, so I didn't think much of it. I took the pizza to the front door. There was no doorbell, so I knocked loudly on the door. Within 10 seconds, I heard the sound of footsteps hitting wood on the inside of the house. The footsteps made it to the door and stopped. I started to feel uneasy. I got the feeling that I was being watched. And that's when I noticed there was a peephole in the door. "It's the pizza guy," I called out. I heard a low, harsh-sounding voice on the other side of the door, telling me to bring the pizza out back. I didn't like the idea of going back there. Something didn't seem right. "Are you sure, sir?" I called out. He didn't answer my question. The sound of footsteps didn't move away from the door, so I had the feeling he was still watching me. I almost found myself walking back to my car, but I decided I didn't want any trouble with my boss. The last time I brought a pizza back, he gave me attitude. So I reluctantly walked through the uncut grass and around the small house to the back. I remember there was a shed and a little patio back there. In the patio, there was a table with 4 chairs surrounding it. In one of the chairs, facing away from me, I saw the head of somebody sitting in the seat. I began walking over and said, "Excuse me," but the person didn't even move an inch. "Excuse me," I said again louder. Then from behind me, I heard, "Psst, over here." I turned around to see a man poking his head out from the corner of the house, looking at me with a crazed smile. "Come over here, I want to show you something." I freaked out, turned around and ran around the house in the opposite direction, back to my car, for some reason still holding the pizza. I got in my car, started it, and got away from there. On my way back to the pizzeria, I pulled over to the side of the road and called the police. Eventually, I was informed that there was no sign of anybody having been in that house for a long time. I quit my delivery job a few days after that. I have no idea what would have happened to me had I gone up to that man, but to this day, I still wish I'd just turned my head to see who or what was sitting in that patio chair. Yeah. I was doing late-night deliveries during this particular shift. When I worked this job, I lived in the Poconos. It was very rural up there. I often found myself driving down roads surrounded by nothing but trees, just like this night, only it was dark and foggy this time. Driving down a shortcut to town that I had taken many times before, I slam on the brakes when I see somebody jump out from the bushes onto the road. The sickening bump and thump from the front of the car confirmed that I had hit the person. I put my hand to my forehead, cursing to myself. I couldn't believe what just happened. I just hit a person. I got out of my car and checked to see if they were all right. It was a man wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. He lay motionless by my car tire. I had no idea what to do. At this point, I was panicking. Why the hell was this guy in the middle of nowhere? Why did he jump in front of my car? And then things got weirder. I can hear a scream for help, coming from the woods to the left of me. Somebody was in trouble. I looked at the man I hit with my car. He was still on the ground, motionless. I'd only be gone for a minute, I figured. For whatever stupid reason, I thought it was okay to leave the man behind to go into the woods. I moved in the direction I heard the scream originally, hoping to hear another, but it was just total silence except for the night creatures making their sounds. "Where are you?" I yelled out. It was at that moment I heard the sound of a foot crushing the leaves on the ground. I turned in the direction of the sound, and even in the dark and foggy weather, I could still make out the figure of somebody hiding behind a tree opposite me. I ran as fast as I could back to my car, looking back constantly to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got back to my car, the man I had hid was gone. I didn't stick around to wonder where he went. I just got back in my car and proceeded down the road. My heart was racing the whole drive through, but I still ended up delivering the pizza. I got to the house, and when I rang the bell, a middle-aged woman answered. After paying, I noticed that her eyes focused on something behind me, and then she asked me, "They let you guys have delivery partners now?" I was confused and asked her what she meant, and she told me, "You got someone with you in your car." I felt a pain in my stomach as I turned and saw somebody sitting in the backseat of my car. I called the cops using the woman's phone, and they arrived shortly after, but the person in the backseat of my car was already gone. The scariest thing about this whole story, the police found a blood-stained knife on the floor of my car where the man was hiding. This memory still haunts me every day, and I can genuinely tell you, it's painfully scary just to imagine how things could have turned out if I hadn't made the delivery.